Hi Ioniconf, welcome to Angular v14 Hearts Ionic. My name is Emma Twersky. I'm a developer relations engineer at Google on the Angular team, and I'm super excited to talk about everything that's greenlit in v14 to talk about and how it really brings Ionic developers some really cool added benefits. So, uh, if you didn't know, Ionic and Angular power roughly 10% of apps on the iOS App Store and almost 20% of apps on Android. So that is a massive portion of the App Store and Android app surface that is powered by Angular and Ionic. And because of that, it's something that we're really focused on. So today, I want to talk about what exactly is new. So as I'm recording this, V14 is not yet out. As you're watching this, V14 is not quite out, but we know what's going to be included. The first RC was already cut, and V14 will be releasing on June 2nd. So all of this is coming in a matter of weeks, if not days. So we're excited to talk about it. We're excited to tell you why you should be thinking about updating your apps, and what we're hopefully bringing to that Ionic Angular platform. So I titled this talk as sort of a fairy tale romance. And keeping with that theme, my idea for what I'm hoping I will bring to you in the next 20-30 minutes is I'm going to tell you what the new thing in Angular is, because there's a bunch there. Then I'm going to tell you why you should care about it. Maybe you love it, maybe you hate it and you're not going to use it. That's totally fine. But I want to make sure you know why we're doing it, because at the end of the day, developer satisfaction is really the number one thing that we care about. And when I think about prioritizing or like pushing the team to do features, that is the number one thing we're thinking about is developer experience, and end user experience. So like, performance, all those goodies. And then in Ionic, I want to make sure I apply like, okay, there's this Angular concept. This is why you should think about using it. And this is how you would go use it. So instead of like hand wavy, holdy, like there's a cool thing in the future, I want to make sure this is applicable and you walk away with some like tangible like things beyond updating that you're going to do. So the 5 things we're going to focus on are standalone components, directives and pipes, typed forms, page accessibility in your title and the router, reusable components, and authorship of if you own a component library or just, most apps should have some sort of reusable pattern to their component structure. And then CLI autocompletion, which is like totally developer experience related. So let's get started with standalone components. This all started as an RC, and what standalone components are a way to streamline the authoring of Angular applications by reducing the need for ng modules. So in version 14, we are releasing standalone components in developer preview, which means that they are not yet fully stable and ready to use. But they're fully ready for exploration and development. So basically all we're saying is that normally we follow Semver. We're very strict about not breaking changes, or not introducing breaking changes, or at least introducing a path between breaking changes. The difference here is that we don't know what we don't know yet about something like this big of a change. And so we want to reserve the right to say, like, if we release this and we notice that there's something changing or something breaking people's development workflow that we want to change, we want to reserve the right to do that. So go explore, let us know, like tweet me. My Twitter handle is in like all these slides. Open a GitHub issue. Like our team is very actively working on these right now and super excited to see how you use them. But there are potential changes that would be outside of the typical model of backwards compatibility. So with standalone components, directives, and pipes, all you do is introduce the standalone true flag, and that allows you to import directly to your component decorator things without the ng module. So you can explore a StackBlitz demo, which I have But I also just want to dig into what that code looks like. So we're going to start out with like a super simple demo. Sorry, let me make this bigger. So this is super simple demo. So this is just like a component that I've bootstrapped. So in this example standalone component, you can see that I introduced the standalone true flag. And I have this import field that we're going to start adding some stuff to. But that's really it. Like simply, I have my template. It's going to be a hello world. I'm bootstrapping it directly in as a root component. And there's no module attached to this. So it's fully exporting and importing itself. If I introduce another standalone component, we can imagine that we have an image component that I'm exporting somewhere else that's also a standalone component. And this image component takes in an input of a URL. So I have my URL variable in my class method, and I'm importing it. So I'm importing that component. Again, no modules attached directly to this standalone component. So standalone component goes into standalone component. Similarly, you can export a standalone component. So let's say somewhere else you have a module and you want to use this component again, you would just import it like you would a module. So those two things flow pretty easily between each other. If we build on that a little bit more, let's talk about some directives and pipes. So here, let's say that I want to use the material library to wrap this in like a material card. Obviously, that is not yet a standalone component. Those are components that are part of our component library, and in the future, we may release a standalone version of that library, but for now, it's in a module. So I import my module, my mat card module, from the similar import path you would in a module, but I import it and add it directly to the imports in my component. So you can see there that I have my mat card module imported. I use it in my template. It shows up great. Similarly, ngIf is something that is part of the common module. So again, I'm importing that common module. I'm throwing it in my imports, and then I have access to things like ngIf. Finally, if I have my own custom standalone directive, let's say that I have like a highlight directive that adds some coloring to some text, I can import that directly. Again, I'm adding it to my imports in my component, and same thing I'm using in my template, and I have access to it. So just if you think about it, like this is very much an iterable and incremental migration. So if you can think about it, what I would do is like update my app to v14, know that I have this option. And if you are creating like a really simple highlight directive like this, that's a great instance where like maybe that doesn't need to be a part of a module anymore. Maybe you can reduce some of the like mental load of authoring that directive. And it's a standalone directive, you import it directly and it like works great. And you can still use it in any module that you need to. So super interchangeable, super great. The reason you should care about this is one of the big points of feedback is that learning Angular is hard, especially like small apps. Again, things like that tiny highlight directive don't always need to be part of this like larger mental model of modules, especially when you think about a common anti-pattern is like a shared module, right? Where you import like a ton of stuff into a module, then you throw that around and you're using it all over your app. And that's really heavy, especially if you're not actually using all of those module imports in all of those different places. And so instead, this is streamlining that authoring experience. It's helping make sure that we can lazy load as much as possible. We can tree shake as much as possible. Our virtual modules can be a little bit faster, a little bit better. And it's really creating a better developer experience. So again, the thing to remember about this is it is very much a developer preview. We are still trying to figure out what this means. And so I'm starting the talk with this because I said I was going to say like what the feature is, why you should care about it, and why it applies to Ionic. And I think the thing here is like, I'm not completely sure. I would love to hear from you what this means for Ionic devs. Like, does this mean that in Ionic applications on mobile, your Angular apps are like super standalone because you are reusing a lot of stuff, like you are currently using a lot of like scam single component Angular modules already? Is this like a pattern that makes a lot of sense for Ionic devs, or does it make no sense? Like, let me know. It also means you can release component libraries as standalone. I think that is a really good use case to consider. If you're really just saying, I have all of these components that I want to supply to my developers, I am a component library. Typically, like, there's not a big reason you would group those together in a bunch of modules. And so something to think about is if that is like a really good use case for standalone components, because again, like, if it's already a single component Angular module or a scan pattern, like, that might be a really good use case. And then removing ng modules from mobile component groups, right? Like, that's something I could see there being a lot of. So that is number one. That said, I would love your feedback. This is specifically one where we are like actively, the RFCs or requests for comment are closed on this. There might be more, but we are still actively looking for feedback because this is a major rethinking of the mental model of Angular. Next up, we have typed forms. So let's do let's pause, take a deep breath. Let's do a full 180. Previously, we had like a lot of questions. We were like unsure, right? It's very like hand wavy to think about standalone and what that means, or even what we're calling it. Typed forms are a super great, very scoped change. And so this means that with Angular v14, we are closing the top GitHub issue on the Angular repository, which is implementing strict typing into your Angular reactive form package. So typed forms, at the end of the day, ensure that the values inside form controls, form groups, and form arrays are all type safe across the entire API surface. This enables safer forms, and especially safer forms for anything deeply nested or like complex form use cases. This feature is also the result of a massive public request for comment that got a lot of feedback and design reviews that were built on top of a ton of community prototyping. So I just want to shout out the community contributors, Sonu, Nathaniel, and Cedric. If you're watching this, just like massive kudos, as well as the team developers that from Google that worked on this. So what does typed forms actually look like? When you update, you will be moved automatically over to an untyped form group. So part of the ng update schematic will move you from the current form classes up to, over to the untyped. And then we would expect that you incrementally migrate over and introduce the typed forms package to your classes. So what that looks like is once you've updated, or when you're writing a new typed form group, you can think about it, let's create like a cat named Barb Smith. My cat's name is Rhubarb. And she has 9 lives. So now if I say how many lives are remaining, we can now say, you know, there is no substring on lives. We know that it's a number. And so substring doesn't exist on my number. Previously, like, you could have done any math with it. You could have been like, oh, well, obviously lives is a float because you can have half-lives. Now we know, like, well, no, you get 9. And we're not going to do any like fancy, weird math on that. Similarly, we know that we can't remove controls. And if you do remove controls, like that's just not possible, right? The optional or required controls are enforced. So we know that that's not an optional value. You can't remove the lives of the cat. It has to have some amount of lives. And so you can't overload something like that. And then finally, form groups are aware of their child. So we know that there's no middle name. My cat's name is Rhubarb Smith, known as Barb Smith in this case. There's no middle name there. So again, when you're updating, just think about the fact that the update schematic is going to be fully incremental. It's going to move gradually. So ng update, you're going to go from form group to something called untyped form group. And then as you migrate, my suggestion and the way I have tested it is you would just search for any instance of the string untyped in your code that was introduced by that update schematic, and you would slowly migrate over so that, again, like because your forms aren't currently strongly typed, those could introduce errors, or you just want to make sure that you're handling those types correctly. So moving them slowly over by searching for instances where we introduced the untyped class. But that means that the update schematic isn't going to break anything because you're going to remain untyped until you make that change. And there's totally cases where it makes sense to stay untyped. Let's say you like live on a street that is could be like a combination of numbers or strings or something like that. Maybe you want to make sure that like it could be a number or a string, or there's reasons that we can't strongly type a value like that. That's completely reasonable, and that's the reason that we're not deprecating the untyped class. We're just moving you over to untyped and giving you the option to add typings to your forms. So just a note there. And then the other cool thing to highlight that is that the VS Code editor shows typing support. So as you're actually typing, or as you're actually like using typed forms in your code, you can see that there's autocomplete and that there's like typing support and knowledge. So similar to like other typed classes that there is VS Code or like code editor support for, now that we have typing available for forms, we're able to support that within your code editor. So as you're writing it, you'll see these things. Again, like going back to those errors that I was introducing, you'll see errors if you try and like remove controls or just stuff like that, right? So this gets really cool when you actually go use it. So typed forms, why should you care? Clearly a lot of people do. It was our #1 GitHub issue, so I probably don't have to build a big use case for why you should care about this, but #1, fix your forms, right? Like people want to make sure that like TypeScript is great because it's typed. And someone should clip what I just said and make that a GIF. Typed forms is great because it's typed. We want to make sure that we are allowing you to use types. Typing of your forms makes sense. And it, again, makes it so much safer to create better forms with stronger typings. And again, it's a better developer experience. Like, typically you're running into issues where like there's strings popping up for the number of lives of the cat, right? Like that doesn't make sense. Now we're pushing that to like making sure that the code actually enforces that you're not running into those issues that you can't debug like way down the line. So yeah. For Ionic, I think this is like pretty similar. It's on mobile. I was a mobile developer for 4 years prior to Google. Forms are like a massive part of what you're writing. How many different websites have like submitting your address and information? How many different pay workflows have forms related to this? This is like a very common pattern. I would say forms are like one of the staples of mobile development. And so typing them is a big win, especially for the mobile space. Next, we have page title accessibility. So a best practice is to ensure that your page title on your app is uniquely communicating the page contents. This means that I have like multiple slide presentations open right now on Google Slides. Each one includes the title of the presentation so that they're unique. So I know like, oh, right now I'm in my Ioniconf presentation slides open because it says that at the top. I have another one open of like Angular v14 resources. Like it says that at the top. I can know without having to go into the page what that page is. It's really good UX. So like I personally don't identify as having a visual impairment, but it's helping me. But if you are somebody using accessibility services, if you're using TalkBack on Android, if you're using VoiceOver, any of those services, page titling is really important for communicating page contents to a user without making them navigate in and explore the actual native content. So in version 13.2, we introduced a new router.title property to the Angular router that makes adding titles super easy. And it's also strongly typed due to an amazing community contribution by Marco. And what this means is that when I'm defining my routes, I have this title property. I don't have to put it in data. I don't have to use like page title managers, services, anything like that that you were normally using, and it's right there. You can also configure more complex strategies. So here I'm implementing a title strategy and handing that, and that means that instead of having to repeat the code of saying like my app dash, I can intelligently formulate the format. So if you have more complex strategies, that totally makes sense. In both of the examples I just showed, if you navigated to the about page, it would be my app dash about me, and my app dash home for the home page. You can learn more about this. There's a workshop that we did for Google I/O 2022 earlier this month that builds this out. But at the end of the day, you should care because making your app more accessible. It's a way better developer experience to not have to custom manage your page title with a page title service. Again, we talked about it. It's better UX. Like, the thing about making your app more accessible, and this is like a side rant, is that you should care about accessibility because it matters for people who need those services, but it also just makes your app better. Like, it's just a better UX to like know where you are on a page without having to go into the page. And mobile, this is really important because page analytics data, like Crashlytics reports, a lot of times report based on page title or like navigated route, especially within mobile experiences. And so if you're using things like Google Tag Manager, this is like a common pattern where you don't know, like the data for Crashlytics like might not know where you are within your page, and page titling can really help that. For Ionic, it's like a little bit different because obviously within your router, you're using single page apps translate to single page like native apps. But there is still page titling within like tab structures. So it is still important if you're navigating between apps. There is still page titling involved. It just looks a little different versus like I'm open in Chrome right now and there's literally tab page titles. But yeah, super important. I think this is like a really cool feature. Again, like it's super easy. You just add this title property. Like how easy is that? So yeah. Next, we're gonna speed run. Point number 4 is authoring better reusable components. What this means is a ton of things. I grouped them all together. Number 1, the dev kit, the Angular component dev kit, or CDK, provides a whole suite of tools that make authoring components and building Angular components easier. In version 14, we're promoting CDK menu and CDK dialog to stable. So this means that things like this, where you're opening dialogues with animations, are all stable component primitives within the CDK. So you can create code that has like CDK menu, directive CDK target menu aim. You're controlling those menus, you're opening dialogues, you're animating dialogues, and all of that is fully promoted to stable. It also means that these CDK primitives can be used to create more accessible custom components based on the ARIA specs, which still apply if you're in mobile. And they follow menu design patterns, right? So I think especially menus and dialogues are like pretty common in mobile. Dialogues, especially for dismissal and confirmation. I think even more so than web apps, to be honest. So a great win there. Similarly, once you've created those components, we are introducing new methods for component test harnesses, which are a flexible way to write tests for your components that are significantly less brittle than like actually going and just like using CSS queries to find the components on the DOM. And so those methods are has harness, get harness, or null, and actually like loading those fixtures here. So those are 2 methods that we've introduced to check if the harness is present and also return harness instances if it is present. So or null. So great additions to the test harness space. Similarly-ish, in V14, you can bind to protected component members directly from your templates. This was a contribution from Zach Elliott from a different team at Google. And so this gives you way more control over the public API surface of your reusable component. So if you're creating reusable components and you want to make sure that there is a like protected string that it always says hello world in your template, irregardless of how people maybe implement other things, you can still access those in your template. Previously, it would get mad and say that's like a protected class variable. Now, you can make sure that you're saying like, okay, I have my protected strings. Those are not changeable. And then there's things that can be changed dependent on like the implementation use case of your component. So this is super cool, like so useful, so usable. And honestly, like such a small, like it just makes so much sense when you look at it. You're like, well, of course I can do that. But you couldn't always. So similarly, this one is like a little over my head, I'll be honest, but we're adding support for passing an optional injector in when creating embedded views. So when you're creating a view container reference and using the create embedded view method, you can now pass in an injector, and this allows for dependency injection behavior to be customized within the specific template use case. And what this really does, and the part I understand, is that it's enabling, again, cleaner APIs for authoring, again, reusable components and component primitives. So making sure that you're injecting and you're allowing dependency injection behavior within the embedded views that you're creating in your reusable components. So everything I just talked about, why should you care? It's more reusable, it's more testable, and it's just better code, right? Like if I combine all those things together, now I'm like injecting my views, I'm creating like separation between protected methods and not in my components. I'm using like directives, so I'm not having to like custom write my menu directives, my dialog directives, and I'm using test harnesses to test it all. So a ton there to write better code. I think specifically to Ionic, the reason to go try out these things is that, again, like mobile specifically, reusable components are the bread and butter, right? So especially in Ionic, like every Ionic code base I ever review, anyone I've ever written, like I'm starting out by just writing like reusable component after reusable component, essentially like creating your own component libraries. Maybe you are an owner of a component library. All of the stuff I just talked about is meant for you. It's meant for building reusable components and component library spaces. So a lot of cool stuff there. And finally, we have CLI autocompletion. And this is part of a larger project that is really about just making the Angular CLI more standardized. So making sure that all of the captioning, it's all lowercase. We're getting rid of like the camel case differences. We're making sure there's aliases that make sense. And with that, we also want to make sure you like know what's possible. So in the Angular CLI, when you update to V14, we will automatically prompt you by default to say, hey, that was your first command execution in V14. We have this new thing called ng completion. Would you like us to add autocomplete? And we'll prompt you to do that. We'll let you opt in, fully opt in. And if you say no at that time, but want to go back and introduce it, you can always type in ng completion to do that. And what it means is that like I type in mg several all the time. Like I am a great speller. I love the New York Times spelling bee. I am so bad at typing. And so I type, like typos are just a part of your daily basis, right? Like autocomplete is great because I can say, okay, ng generate component. What are my options there? Look, I can create a project. I can dry run. I can add standalone. I'm doing here. And like in Z Shell, you can see all of the cool stuff I'm doing there. Similarly, let's say I do ng, what do I do next? I do ng, look at all the things I can do. I can add, I can do analytics, I can build, I can cache. Here I'm building, and you can see here that autocomplete also has knowledge of your workspace and your specific production context. So it knows that when I'm building, it looks for which setting it had. And in this app that I'm doing autocomplete on, I just have a production build setting. So it knew to autocomplete and finish with production because that was one of the options I had. So it has contextual knowledge within the CLI of what your specific app can do. Big one here, like super easy, doesn't matter if you're an Ionic developer or not, like this is about typos. If you use a different CLI, I know that we are actively working with partners to make sure that there is similar autocomplete capabilities added on top of our completion so that this is available regardless. So if you're using a CLI, we're actively making sure that autocomplete can be a part of your developer experience. Literally, like I found out about this, like it changed my life. And so that was my talk. We talked about standalone components, typed forms, page accessibility, all of those reusable component goodies, and autocomplete. And I still want to bring in a few more because this is Angular and we have a lot. So, real quickly, let's speed run. Extended Developer Diagnostics are an extendable framework that gives you insight into your template. This is built in conjunction with the Angular language service. So as you're coding, we're giving you diagnostics that give compile time warnings with precise actionable suggestions so that you can catch issues in your templates and all of this before runtime. And really the big thing here is like, let's just make sure that you never actually hit the error. Let's like find the error before that happens. So this shows up when you're trying to build, when you're trying to serve your app, and mostly in the code editor itself. So here you can see we introduced this in v13.2 with two of the most common templating errors, which is the banana in a box. So here you can see I have my parentheses, my like banana, right, inside the brackets. If we're like common Angular developers, we know like that's probably switched. Technically, like the banana can go in the box, but like 99.999 times out of 100, Angular developers mean for it to go the other way. And so we can throw an error and say like, hey, we think you don't mean that. Similarly, nullish coalescing. So here, those two question marks of nullish coalescing, we love to throw on things, but if the value isn't nullable, that nullish coalescing is never going to be hit. There's no reason to have that in your template. So like, let's tell you that you can get rid of it. The cool thing about this is it'll tell you when your code is wrong. It's all before runtime. It's like in your code editor itself, less context switching, less errors that you're hitting. The error warnings are like significantly more detailed. So we're really trying to say like, hey, this is what you did. This is what we think you should do. Let's do it. We have like links to guides, links to docs. We're really trying to throw in as much information as possible so that you have that information up front. And what I think is cool, and the reason I wanted to talk about it here, is that extended diagnostics, like we are introducing the ones that we know are like low-hanging fruit, like a banana in a box, but there is a huge use case here for if there's mobile-specific diagnostics. I don't know, you tell me, but there are a ton of GitHub issues already open. I have a bunch on accessibility because that's my passion. But if there are diagnostics that you think you could introduce, open a PR, like give us the ability to give that to everyone. There's so many different template specific use cases where we can say like, hey, we think this might be wrong. Like we see that you're running an Ionic application, we see that you're using capacitor, and we know that like in the template, it should probably look like this and you did this. Like, let's help developers catch those pitfalls. So this is more so than the diagnostics we're introducing. What's really exciting is about the extendable framework for future extended diagnostics. So this is a space where you'll see us continue to add diagnostics. Again, tons of GitHub issues open. If you can think of mobile specific ones, like this is a great place to contribute ideas, feature requests, GitHub issues, because the future of this is like really cool. And this is all built on Ivy. This is all because we can do all these things because we've invested time in these language services. And so now let's like give developers the benefits. So super cool. Similarly, tree shakeable error messages were a community contribution from Ramesh, and this adds new runtime error codes. And what it really does is we can throw the error. So again, extended diagnostics, we're throwing those long errors, right? But because we introduced this pattern of error codes, which I have a blog post on if you're interested, we can link to reference guides. We can give you all this information. We can create these like really long strings. And then in production bundles, we can remove all of the string and we can just give you the error code. So the production bundle is smaller, it's safer. We're not like giving explicit details of what the errors are. We're just giving the error code. And then it's traceable if you go back. So that it's fully tree shakeable. And error codes really help that because there's this format. We can still throw the error. We can give you useful information to say what the crash was, but we don't have to give you the long string. It also means we don't have to be worried about how long the string gets. So we can really care about the string in the dev build, giving you like detailed guides. So yeah, care about this because prod builds don't have init error messages. They're smaller, they're tree shakeable, and we can create the most verbose error guides and not worry about bundle size in dev modes. And then finally, we have experimental ESM application builds. So this means that we have introduced an experimental ES-based build system, which compiles pure ESM output. You can try this in your angular.json by updating the browser builder. So if you search for the instance of builder browser, you can replace it with browser ES build. And we're super excited to collect your feedback. This is experimental, but we're excited to see how it impacts your app's performance. And please give us feedback because this is something we're super interested in. So those were my 8 star things to look forward to in V14. Again, standalone components, like let us know what you think. Typed forms, make your forms typed and safer. Page accessibility, like create a better UX with your router, like so much simpler. Author reusable components. I think the API surface control, especially with protected members, is really great. CLI autocompletion, diagnostics, like go open an issue. If you have a diagnostic you want, like go open an issue and then tweet it at me. I will be your biggest advocate. Tree shakeable error messages. Again, like tree shaking is great. It's like the biggest buzzword, but like this is an instance where we can tree shake away details, which means we can add more details, which is like so great. And then ESM application builds experimentally, which are so cool. So thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me like at length talk about all these things. Hopefully you can see how we're thinking about bringing all of these features to V14. You can check out update.angular.io to see our recommendations as well as the breaking changes that go along with your update journey and our suggestions for how to solve those. A ton of this is just included in the update schematic of ng update. We are very, very concerned about backwards compatibility, bar standalone components being in developer preview. And so again, like these are all featurettes. They're all tiny. They're like little wins, little ads that make like a world of difference. I've been developing apps here for a while. You can tweet me at this is wrong. We'll go here. You can tweet me at Twersky. It's my last name with my first initial. And I am so excited to talk about V14 with you, about Ionic, about how Angular loves Ionic and how we want to make sure you're having a great developer experience, creating great apps. And yeah, thank you so much and happy Ioniconf. May you have a green day. So, bye.